welcome. Please join us. We'll wait a few seconds. Please feel free to drop your name and your affiliation in the chat. We know we have some interesting people joining the webinar today, and we'd love to kind of see where everybody's coming from. I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Kendra Hills. I'm the program director at Century Tech Foundation, and welcome back to the second session in the Built to Last series. This event is co-hosted by the Benton Institute for Broadband Society, the Century Tech Foundation, and the Digital Equity Research Center at Metro. We had a fantastic panel yesterday, and today will be no different. So let's get started with a couple of notes first. Today's session will be recorded and available in the coming days via the metro.org webpage. Yesterday's sessions is actually already available, and we will send a link to that in the chat. Second, we will have a Q&A segment following the panel discussion. So please feel free to add your questions in the Q&A chat box as we go. And third, we will share the link to our event code of conduct in the chat, just so you have that on hand. And so with that being said, I'm pleased to introduce the president of Century Tech Foundation, Marta Urrutia, who is going to give a brief welcome and intro into today's sessions. Marta?
Thank you, Kendra, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to session 2 of Built to Last, Leveraging Federal Investments for Digital Equity. We're very excited for today's discussion, Seizing the Moment, Current Approaches to Digital Equity. As you know, we are hosting a 3-part series this week, and today is part 2. Our focus today is really looking at what folks are doing in this moment to leverage federal funding for digital equity. As we know, all states, territories, and tribes are preparing for 5 years of federal funding through the IIJA, which is being administered through NTIA. And local communities are advancing initiatives, which we'll hear about both today and tomorrow, that are centering equity and justice in their digital equity work. In this series, we're going to hear, or in this session rather, we're going to hear from groups that are rising up to the challenge of ensuring expanded digital access and let me repeat that. They are rising to the challenge to ensure that expanded digital access actually results in equitable opportunities. And with that work, they are addressing barriers within their local and statewide contexts, such as efforts that are pushing back against digital equity in this work with marginalized communities. So we'll hear more about that. But next, I want to move to an introduction of our keynote speaker. With us today, we have Angela Thie Bennett, who is the Director of Digital Equity at NTIA, and she is here to share remarks with us about NTIA and their work as it relates to this current moment. Many of you are familiar with Angela. I'm sure you've heard her speak before. She is a longtime champion of digital equity. She has been on the ground doing the work that many of the advocates and practitioners will hear from themselves are doing. So she is very familiar with our audience and the focus of today's conversation. Welcome, Angela. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks so much, Marta, and good afternoon, everyone. As Marta shared, my name is Angela Thie Bennett. You all can call me Angie, and I am honored to serve as your Digital Equity Director under the U.S. Department of Commerce's National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA. My pronouns are she, her. So we are all here today because of the commitments made by President Biden to ensure that every household in America has access to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet and the tools and resources they need for full participation in our 21st century economy and in society, which is the Internet for All initiative. The Internet for All initiative will meaningfully address the fundamental economic, educational, social, and health-related inequities in our country by connecting all of the people in America, particularly the members of our communities who have been excluded by design. passed on a bipartisan basis in both chambers of Congress. The Biden-Harris administration led the efforts to pass the historic bipartisan infrastructure law, which included the $42.45 billion for BEAD, which is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, to build the infrastructure for the internet and to ensure that the good jobs created go to individuals in our communities who have been left out and left behind. $2.75 billion for the Digital Equity Program to empower Americans with the skills and resources they need to fully participate in our society and economy. $1 billion for Middle Mile to expand Middle Mile infrastructure and reduce the cost of connecting unserved and underserved areas, and $2 billion for Tribal to help tribal communities expand high-speed internet access and adoption on tribal lands. And I would also like to note that there is a Tribal Notice of Funding Opportunity that is open currently, and the deadline for its submission is January 24th of 2020, actually January 23rd of 2024. And there is a set aside of up to $100 million to achieve digital equity on tribal lands. So under the Internet for All initiative, states are required to coordinate their efforts in both the BEAD and the DE programs to ensure that while we are focused on the technical aspects of broadband, we don't lose sight of our purpose, which is the people. Because the reality is, if we connect 100% of Americans to reliable, high-speed internet and do not improve their quality of life, then what have we really achieved? And so you may ask, what does that mean for the people of the United States of America? Well, one, as a result of this historic funding, we in America are undergoing the largest demonstration of participatory democracy this country has ever experienced. Individuals and organizations from our most impacted communities are getting a seat at the planning table and actively participating in the decision-making process. Literally all across our country, from urban areas to small remote parts of our country, people are showing up and making their voices heard, not just in meetings, but in their state digital equity plans. So I encourage you to continue to show up and be a part of this movement. NTIA is publishing each state and territory's digital equity and BEAD plans at broadbandusa.ntia.doc.gov. Please, it's one site where you can go to and get a link to all of the state's published plans. Please make sure you check out your state's plans and make your voices heard on your state plans. To find out the contact person for your state, as well as NTIA's State Federal Program Officer that is charged with serving your state, please go to www.internetforall.gov. So often we are told to come to the planning table and we can't find it. NTIA has made sure that not only can you find the planning table, but you have points of contact. The second thing I will encourage everyone to do is to empower our states to be very intentional in identifying the root causes of digital inclusion, which will require a very strategic and comprehensive approach. Digital exclusion refers to the gap between those who have access to and use the information and communication technologies and those that do not. So to help states address this issue, individuals and communities can help your state identify those specific groups that are disproportionately affected, such as our low-income individuals, our rural communities, our seniors, our people with disabilities. All of the 8 cover populations that we have prioritized in our programs, and help our states understand the extent of digital exclusion in those different communities and demographics within your state. The second thing that you can do for your states is share data, share data, share data. If you have data, please share them with your state to help them identify the areas with the highest need and help guide them to develop targeted interventions. And the third thing I would encourage you as you are working and collaborating with your states is to hold space and to collaborate. So ask yourself, as we are asking ourselves at NTIA, how are we holding the line and protecting our vulnerable communities from bad actors who come in and, seek to capitalize off of, their trauma of experience. And as we talk about centering our work in equity and justice, it's so critical that we are holding space for those individuals and those grassroots organizations that are on the ground doing the work to ensure that they have a meaningful decision-making, seat at the table. And finally, I would encourage everyone to imagine the possibilities. What will America look like in 2030? So imagine the possibilities of America's, I like to say our future story, where every individual, regardless of their socioeconomic backgrounds, has full access, and not second-class access, but full access to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet and the resources they need to thrive and live a healthy and fulfilling life. So, and we can't just stop at imagining the possibilities, but encouraging us to all come together, break down our silos, pool our collective resources, and ensure that this once-in-a-lifetime funding gets to the people that need them the most. You see, the Internet for All initiative is not just about the internet. It really is about people. It's a rallying cry for inclusivity, equal access, and empowerment. It's about ensuring that the benefits of the digital age reach every corner of the community, leaving no one behind. This once-in-a-lifetime funding is a unique opportunity to make a lasting impact. And by focusing on the people and directing these resources where they are needed the most, we can bridge the digital divide, create educational opportunities, spur economic growth, and enhance the overall well-being of our country. And finally, we must maintain our sense of urgency and seize this moment to build a more connected, inclusive, and empowered future. Together, we can make the Internet for All initiative not just a vision, but a reality that brings positive change to the lives of the people it serves. So in closing, I leave you with the words of Angela Davis. You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. So as we strive to achieve digital equity together, I encourage you to dream, imagine the possibilities, and let's all come together to make these possibilities a reality for every person in the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. That was wonderful. And thank you for underscoring that at the end of the day, this is about people and the possibilities that they can access when we solve these problems together. With that, I would like to move to welcoming our panel and to introduce to you our moderator today. Lauren Moore joins us today as the moderator for the panel Seizing the Moment, Current Approaches to Digital Equity. She is the New York State Librarian and Assistant Commissioner for Libraries at the New York State Education Department. In that role, she oversees the Division of Library Development, the Regent Joseph E. Bowman Jr. Research Library, and the New York State Talking Book and Braille Library. She has served in various leadership positions at public libraries and library systems throughout her career, including the executive director of the Pioneer Library System, where she led the development of 42 small and rural libraries in Ontario, Wayne, Wyoming, and Livingston counties by coordinating shared services. Ms. Moore has also served in leadership positions for various library professional organizations, as well as for local, regional, statewide service groups, including the New York State Complete Count Commission. She currently serves on the board of directors of the School, Healthy, and Libraries Broadband Coalition. Ms. Moore earned her Master of Library and Information Sciences degree from the University of Pittsburgh. She also holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in English from Rutgers University. Lauren, welcome, and I will give it to you to introduce your panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I am so excited to start this conversation today with our esteemed panelists. I'm joined today by Jordana Barton Garcia, who has been an educator, a nonprofit community development financial institution leader, and a community development banker, a Federal Reserve researcher practitioner, a philanthropy executive, and a technologist. She's now the fellow with Connect Humanity. We're also joined by Juan Morrow Jr., who is now the executive director of Free Geek and who has an amazing story to share about how his experiences there. And H. Rose Trossel, who is a senior policy analyst at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. We'll drop their full bios in the chat so you can learn about their amazing careers and their amazing perspectives. And I want to jump right in. Jordana, Juan, and H, if you're ready, I want to start with a big question, which is something I love to hear our practitioners' perspectives on, which is, what do the terms digital equity and digital justice mean to you, especially in the context of the communities you serve and the work that you're doing right now? H, do you want to jump in first?
Sure. I've been thinking about this a lot. I actually wrote my answer down before because I didn't want to trip over it. So one thing that I think comes up a lot in the tribal context is, what does tribal digital justice, tribal digital equity look like? Tribes have been historically underinvested in and cut out of the economy for decades or centuries. We cannot reverse this just by bringing in internet access. Personally, for me, I grew up in a rural small town near a few Ojibwe reservations in Minnesota. And I'm not talking about like the cute small towns you see in Hallmark movies. No, I'm talking about towns that are dirt roads, deep-seated poverty. The volunteer library was in a tin shack that also stored ATV vehicles. What does it mean to bring internet access to a community like that? You know, it's not going to fix problems overnight. Work from home jobs are still hard to find even after the pandemic. There's this return to the office discourse you see from a lot of urban businesses, and it's cutting off people. It's cutting off great minds in rural and tribal areas. Tribal digital equity is about empowering Indigenous individuals to have internet access, digital skills, digital opportunities for work, education, and health in their own communities, on their own reservations. It's culturally responsive, like digital language revitalization programs like my tribe, Cherokee Nation, has. It's about keeping communities together, and it's about supporting tribal sovereignty and building tribal economies. That's what tribal digital justice means to me personally. Sorry, that's all that I have actually pre-written, so.
No apologies necessary. That was really, I don't know, really interesting. Juan or Jordana, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. So I split digital equity and digital justice in two different ways. So digital equity for me is really about how do we do the work together, right? Like building programmatic work, initiatives, and plans that are centered around community approach, right? Is making sure that we're working with community and with the abundance on an execution of these plans, right? And that we are analyzing them in real life, right? Like that we are constantly going back to community, those who are being impacted by this work, and asking them, is this still working for you? And then shifting approach, right? And bringing those along the journey who have the power and authority to be able to execute and to make these decisions, right? And make them quickly for community. I think about digital justice as coalition and community commitment. So not just the folks who are being impacted by digital inequality, but really like when you're trying to restore an individual in a home, what is it going to take to be able to do that? And I see it in the work that we're doing here in Oregon. Coalition has been the most impactful way to be able to bring the injustice of digital inequality and restore individuals who've been impacted by it. So that's for me kind of how I separate them both. And they intersect, right? There's intersectionality between the two. And then depending on who is benefiting or who is making the decision, they can change, right? But that is how I see digital equity and digital justice.
Jordana, do you want to take a crack at this one?
Yeah, definitely. Digital equity and digital justice. I think that this is about systemic issues in our society that have been embedded into law and policy that have created persistent poverty. And I can give the example of the Texas-Mexico border where I'm from and where I've done a lot of research and am currently working with Connect Humanity with communities on the border region. And so from the beginning of when Mexico, when Texas brought Mexico in with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the people were told they would keep their land and they would become U.S. citizens. Well, they were not allowed to keep their land. It was either taken by force or by the court system. So that created an underclass or a class system where if you didn't own property, you couldn't build wealth. And so now when we see that low income people, and in this case, the border example is 93% or more Latino population. We're dealing with those historical creation of poverty, and then the persistence built into policies and laws thereafter that kept discrimination in schools and so forth. And now with the importance of having access to and not just access the way it's talked about in the FCC map, but actually having internet and digital skills building and all of that is something that we must work on, because everything, as we know, in our digital economy requires, and as we've seen, jobs, most jobs now require digital skills. We went from middle skills jobs, certainly over 85% require some digital skills. And then a Brookings report, released on Department of Labor data talks about, how from 2002, where about 50% of the jobs required some digital skills, now it's closer to 80%. So 77% require medium or high digital skills. So everything has changed, and now we need to catch up. So when it comes to equity and justice, I joined the two because it's about how do we help the people who have been left out, and how do we correct this inequity that has been perpetuated by laws and policies of corporations. It's not just the fact that we either are relying on just the Telecommunications Act, the last major legislation, and then and allowed corporations to kind of decide who's covered. Some of their policies might make lower income communities less attractive. So the outcome, whether the intent is there or not, it's clear that the outcome, if you're not going to be it doesn't fit within your policies to serve low income communities because they don't meet the criteria. We've had this historical underinvestment. So now that when COVID hit and we have this a deeper understanding of what it means to our economy, what it means to people, now we have a chance to correct this and not leave communities behind.
Great, thank you. And I'm wondering if you all can share maybe specific examples of current initiatives that are actively centering equity and justice and what that looks like. One, I know you mentioned your coalition work, and I'm wondering if there might be other examples.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the Coalition of Digital Equity, and where we've centered community-based organizations as leaders of this coalition, and we wanted to remove any sort of authority or government entity running this coalition. Really, we wanted to center community around it. Because for us, the reason why we've been able to reach community and get community trust is because it's community talking to community. It's community solving this issue with community. And then what we do is we bring stakeholders involved. So this is private, public companies, ISPs, government, the technology ecosystem in Oregon. And we come to them when we say, this is the problem we're facing. How can you help fix it? And in this coalition, we're seeing great response. Some of these folks are so separated from the work that's happening or the inequality right on the ground, or and we are going, door by door, town hall by town hall, conversation by conversation, and collecting this data, right? And bringing it back to the community and saying, this is what's going on in our backyard. And through that coalition, we've been able to do all that work, not only just locally, but we are supported by national organizations that are doing bigger coalition building, right? I mean, I'm in Washington right now and I'm doing advocacy, right? Going door to door, congresswomen, congressmen, senators, and telling them, hey, this is what's happening in real life. And I'm supported by coalitions of coalitions of coalitions. And that's one way that we're able to really communicate and to showcase the work that's going on.
H, what about you? What are you seeing that is actively centering equity and justice? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I should just leave myself off mute. I've been going to a lot of the Indigenous digital inclusion working groups that National Digital Inclusion Alliance has been putting on, and I've been talking with folks there, learning about on the ground experiences so that I can uplift those in the policy space. Sometimes I feel very removed from what is happening on the ground, just because I'm not working with the public. But I've been able to talk with them specifically about the Affordable Connectivity Program, find the problems, talk about the solutions, help people troubleshoot together. It's amazing to be in that space, to hear people from tribes across the US talk together about what challenges they're facing in their communities and what they are doing to solve those. It's incredible, and I feel like we need more spaces like that.
Jordana, are you seeing any good examples of work that's actually centering equity, justice, and doing that work that you were referring to about looking at the root causes and thinking about the systemic issues in a meaningful way?
Yes, I mean, definitely Connect Humanity is working in Appalachia with very directly working with persistent poverty region, and then we're also working on the Texas Mexico border, South Texas, and I'll since I'm leading the Texas work, I'll give that example. So this is a population that is a persistent poverty region, a large one of the U.S. We have 5 persistent poverty clusters in the U.S., including Central Appalachia, of course, areas of Indian country, and the Mississippi Delta and Black Belt region, and then the Texas-Mexico border. And it's not an accident. We're trying to go where the work is most needed, right? And to bring in the resources that are necessary to do this well. Because and so the example of the border region, this is a persistent poverty region. It's several of the covered populations, very, for example, persons of color, so 93 to 95% Latino in this region. So a huge covered population, as well as veterans and other of the covered population. So that, we went there for a reason, because the Federal Reserve, the Brookings, of course, the U.S. Census, NDIA, had all revealed, and as we know, low-income people are the most impacted by the digital divide, but those entities specifically created reports and presented data on this region, and it has one of the greatest digital divides in the country. So we chose it for a reason, to try to bring in the resources that we all know are necessary to be able to, number one, when you're dealing with a systemic issue and challenging the status quo, there are a lot of very powerful forces at play to try to keep things the way they are. And so just coming in to work with communities, I had previously been working with the community with the Federal Reserve and then Methodist Healthcare Ministries. And so we were able to just kind of jump right in and bring in some of the communities that had already gotten started. In fact, FAR Texas on the border had chosen the municipal ISP, the public broadband model, and has already built out a significant portion of its network. Brownsville, on the other end, had chosen the public-private partnership model, an amazing model, and they are getting what they need for the population, very high-speed internet. So FARs, they're both fiber to the home networks, and so they are getting the high-speed internet at very low cost. So the example of FAR, 500 Mbps symmetrical is the minimum speed for $20 a month, and for nothing for as long as we have ACP for free. So and then the school system, the Tri-City School District has become involved and is going to pay for all their student households and so forth. So so we got a little bit of a head start. So now the other cities and counties are doing their work, doing their feasibility studies. The reason these communities, we had already started working on they had their feasibility studies and all of their surveys done and so forth. And they had already looked at models and really considered very carefully what they wanted to do. And that's why they were ready when ARPA dollars came down. They were able to use ARPA, and we created a capital stack that really worked for the community. So ARPA dollars, a municipal bond, philanthropic dollars, all the things. I'm in the field of community development and community development finance for most of my career, or a lot of my career, and that's what we do to bring equity into a project. You create a capital stack that works, where they go in with equity, and it doesn't take that long in the case of a broadband network to kind of break even and go beyond. So FAR really they both wanted to be owners rather than renters, so that they could do the things for economic number one, get households connected, but also for the economic development opportunities, right? We're in a region where you have the highest cost of healthcare for many reasons, which I've outlined in previous studies, and the poorest health outcomes in the country. So they decided to focus on telehealth. So basically we helped organize and help to create with them the Rio Grande Valley Broadband Coalition, and they identified digital workforce development, and we're following NTIA's plan to a T, the guide that they offer, and have done the whole analysis. We had work groups in all of these areas. We created a fund for the digitalization of small business. Small business is so important in this region, and they're kind of left out of the thoughts of the IIJA. So we created kind of an ACP for small micro enterprise and small business, as well as the three legs of the stool. So digital skills building, and then having the equipment, and of course not leaving out the in the case of a business, getting them the speed and capacity and a connection that they need, whether they need a fiber extension, whatever it is that they need to get the service. And so part of this group is local and regional ISPs that wanted to join. Everybody was invited to school organizations and many other economic development actors and municipal and county governments.
So it sounds like you were able to connect concepts around digital equity and digital justice to really like the priorities of that community, which maybe helped you advance some of those ideas. And because I'm wondering, H and Juan and Jordana, are you experiencing resistance to the concepts of digital equity and digital justice, or resistance to that work? And I'm wondering how you do overcome that if you've experienced that. H, do you want to go first?
Sure. I don't know if resistance is the exact word I'd use, but there's a lot of misunderstandings about tribes and tribal sovereignty. A lot of tribes are learning more about the, different types of networks. We're seeing a lot more tribally owned networks, that implementation of tribal digital sovereignty. So it's not so much resistance as much it's especially when you have like I've heard this from tribes, is that there's confusion when they're trying to work with state governments. Like the BEAD program that's coming out really has an option for tribes to be sort of sub-grantees of the state to get access to that funding. And, not all tribes are going to do that, but those that are interested are, possibly running into some confusion around working with that state government's not recognizing the full impacts of tribal sovereignty, because usually tribes are working with the federal government on that nation to nation like basis, and one of the sort of problems that we're seeing is the federal government only funded the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program with $3 billion. And the last estimate I had seen of the need in Indian country was $5 billion. And that's just regarding like broadband deployment. That's not talking about digital equity and digital skills. So there's a lot of barriers in the way, but I don't know if it's exactly resistance. It's misunderstanding, not enough money, all of those kinds of problems.
Yeah. Juan, are you experiencing resistance at all?
Yeah, similar to what H just said, the resistance that we really feel is just the systemic resistance of trying to provide community things that they've never had or that they intentionally were excluded from. And so what happens is we're working with these systems and everybody involved is just trying to navigate the best way to provide community what they need. But for us in Oregon, as we're doing this work and trying to figure out ways to work around the system is, there's still, the barriers that we see for our most vulnerable folks are, the continued redlining, right? As we're looking at maps, like it's evident where, wiring was done and where it wasn't, right? Like it's like black and white. There's also red tape, right? Like with funding. You've got folks that are doing digital equity work, doing digital justice work that are hustlers. Like I'm hustling every month to try to find funding to support this work. In Oregon, there's been no real investment from the state for funding for this work. And so we got funds from the federal government through, ARPA and CARE, and the American Rescue Plan, but that was the federal funds and they're about to run out, even for ACP. So these are the barriers that we constantly have to try to work around. It's like, what am I going to do when this runs out? And so for us, continuing to use coalitions and continuing to collect the stories and the data to help these politicians who have money to be able to continue this work reprioritize, right? And trying to make this, an issue that we can sustain, not an issue, but a solution that we can sustain. There are folks on the ground similar to my organization that have been doing this work for 23 years. We were doing digital navigation before it was called digital navigation. We were doing digital equity work before it was called digital equity work. And so now it's like, well, we've been trying to survive all this time, trying to connect folks. Where does the rest of the world, the rest of this of the states need to get together? And I'm talking about government, right? We're here advocating for the federal government, but where is every city's commitment to doing this work? Where is every state's commitment to do this work? And the commitment for me is funding. We've already I don't need you to tell me how we're going to solve this problem. We've already figured it out. I just need you to close these capacity gaps so that we can actually eliminate the digital divide.
Does anyone else have thoughts about, that was my next question, really around advocacy and engagement politically to make this take hold? You've all been doing this work for decades, and what is it? How do we get people to listen and invest and make sure there's a long-term sustainable future for equity and justice in digital spaces?
So I did want to address a little bit the resistance question first, because I think it's a very important one. And we have, I think the resistance, certainly in communities that are trying to take action, right, and perhaps have chosen a public-private partnership model and are doing a contract with maybe a local co-op or a regional ISP, and went through the whole process of planning and then put out an RFP and are forming those partnerships. Sometimes they have, certainly in the border region, you would think these communities that had kind of been forgotten and maybe, had lines, of course, from telephone era, copper lines, so a lot of DSL and the legacy coaxial cable in cities. But now the large ISPs, we have two in Texas, the national kind of ISPs, in interviews and in op-eds that they've created, have challenged and said, communities don't know how to do this. We know how to do this. It's a cybersecurity risk. It's all of these things, trying to put fear into communities, which is, when you study kind of the electrification, rural electrification, and all of that we had to go through as a country. The large corporations did the same thing, right? So it's misinformation, and then in one breath, criticizing their public-private partnership, and then saying how great it is in another part of the state or another state. So just these contradictions, I think, are the political pressure on mayor, like in both of the cases that I had mentioned previously on the border, very, very strong mayors that weren't easily pushed over, right? So they're proceeding with what they have had to think through really carefully with community to make the decisions they made, because they weren't being covered. And they first went to these same ISPs, right, to be asked to be covered. And then I think a real resistance is in the rules that are being implemented. So in this persistent poverty region that is the least one of the least connected areas of the country, and it's been very, very well documented, that according to the FCC map, and I think they spent like at least 45 million for CostQuest to create that map, and they were charged by Congress to create a better map, right, than the previous mapping. However, you can see that it's not somebody trained in research that is doing this study to tell about the digital divide, but that the FCC is getting information that they're looking for, and basically it's perpetuating the challenges that we've had, where companies say, "Oh, you're covered." I mean, we covered this area. Well, they maybe have a fiber line running through it, but they have never served that area. They don't even have the splitting equipment to serve those communities. And then we have communities where the infrastructure doesn't even pass. But according to the map, it's they are fully covered, 250 over 25, 100%, the first iteration of the map. Then also placing the burden on low-income communities to have the knowledge and on this real specific issue, when a lot of our experts couldn't even figure it out, and you have to be able to do GIS mapping and all kinds of very sophisticated, work. And we're putting it on low-income communities to challenge the map and follow all the rules for that. So that's another challenge. We have the LOC, the letter of credit requirement. That's another big problem, and we were successful in joining together. So here comes to your advocacy. So Connect Humanity worked with communities across the country, with organizations across the country, to make the case to allow something besides the letter of credit as an option, because the letter of credit required, like for a to get it to, if you got a grant, you would have to put up 25% for say you're going for a $7.5 million grant, you'd end up having to put up you'd have to tie up 4.6 million for however long it took to build the network. So if you have 4.6 million, that's great. And so that's the matching is 25%, and the letter of credit was 25% of whatever you got. So you'd have to tie that up, because that's what a letter of credit is. But we know in this country that we have other tools that we can use to guarantee, right? It's all about wanting to be responsible and guarantee that it's going to be done and so forth. But what it did was it kept all of our smaller ISPs, our regional ISPs, from even thinking that they could even participate. And so we knew we had women-owned businesses, women-owned ISPs, minority ISPs, small regional ISPs, to have that kind of money to tie up. And then it didn't even make sense for the country, because banks were going to have to tie up like 10.6 billion to get the money out. So we did all the math, we made the case. It was all about showing it in visually. One of my colleagues at Connect Humanity, Brian Vo, it's like kind of like behind the napkin thing, and then he, of course, perfected it with another great colleague. And we went to share it with the group that had formed, because we could see the writing on the wall. So it's very tight. This is very critical now. It's going the NTIA listened to it and agreed after kind of months, right, that they would change that, and they released the new kind of requirements. So now we're not going to have that barrier. And you want small ISPs and all kinds of, right? You want to diversify the ownership of assets in the digital economy. And how do you build wealth in communities if you don't invest locally in those businesses that know how to serve, want to serve, and can serve if they're invested in these communities? So with that, that was one example of advocacy. I think the mapping is going to be, we've already started, but with that, the gross basically the inputs do not tell you about the digital divide. That's the problem. And yet they're deciding. And we've already had one round of boot where nobody qualified, because which is the Capital Projects Fund, Treasury Capital Project Fund. Nobody qualified from this region because they're 100% covered. So according to the FCC map and the Texas map as well, which use the same methodology.
Yeah, I think the letter of credit example is so wonderful because it really shows how powerful, the power of coalitions coming together to advocate on behalf of communities, and that it was effective, and that's going to be a huge game changer in terms of how funds are allocated. So thanks for your leadership on that. And I just think it's so fascinating that for all of you, like in many of your answers to these questions, you've talked about the powers, not just of coalition, but of conversation and of bringing people together, in terms and in order as a way of empowering and making sure that people's voices are heard in the process. So I'm wondering if Juan, maybe you can start and answer this first. If you can share your experiences and insights on what it means to bring so many voices to the table and allow them to contribute to a justice-centered set of solutions and conversations. And what does that in practice, what does that look like?
Can you hear me, Lauren?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yep.
Okay. Great question. I think that this work actually requires us to center community voice. Like, that's the only way that it can get done. Don't invite me into your feedback session or into like, tell me how good this plan looks after you build it. First, and that's one thing. Second is, oftentimes, especially as the states were building their plans, what I saw was, we were having these community engagements, but they all felt like we're just going to sit here, listen, and we're going to carry on with this plan. I think any power or authority to change or make some meaningful change and impact to any plans that were developed, I think that oftentimes, they showed up with like, this is what we created, read it, we will hear you out, and it's probably not going to change. So for me, is I know that, from lived experience myself, and being in community, is that they don't have time to read your 172-page proposal with 2-week notice, and folks who are being asked to provide feedback probably don't have the internet or the device to give you the feedback you need. And so from that sort of experience, I've learned that I need to go to community and I need to center them and ask them first, what do we need to do in all aspects, whether it's a small organization or whether it's at the federal level, right? Folks, even myself, I have to often remember that I forget sometimes what these experiences feel like, right? And being in community, I get reminded all the time. My level of privilege has increased. So the decisions that I make impact my 50 staff. So I got to go make sure, and the close to 5,000 to 10,000 individuals we served every year. I have to make sure that I'm informed before I make a decision that's going to impact their lives. And I think that that's something that we got to make sure that we remember in every space. One of the things I'm really critical about is folks in academia. They're coming to the table like, we discovered this system or this model, and it's like, well, we've been known that in the hood, we've been known that in the ghetto. Like, you didn't discover anything, and you're getting all this credit for this amazing discovery, and that's frustrating, because it's like, well, we've been crying wolf for 20-40 years that this is an issue, and now someone that has a degree is going to, be validated for this discovery or whatever. So I just think that we need to start talking to community more and bringing them into the picture before we develop any plans. Don't come to me with a plan that you already developed, or an initiative or an action plan or a proposal, and then just have me read it when you're not going to have any intention to actually change it.
H, how about you? What strategies have you seen work well in fostering inclusivity and actual meaningful engagement and the kind of stuff that Juan's talking about?
Like exactly what Juan is talking about, like talking to folks on the ground, making sure that the people with more privilege actually understand what is happening. And especially with, like Juan was saying, those folks in academia, like reminding them that they're not discovering something new. Like we all know about discovering things in Indian country. It's not, you're finding things that have existed for a very long time. And one thing with tribal digital navigators is choosing digital navigators, hiring digital navigators from the community who already have those connections, who already have that rapport, who already have that trust. Because, you know, if you just have random people coming in being like, I'm going to help you, that doesn't sound legitimate. That doesn't, like, you know, what does their help even look like if they don't understand what's on the ground? So one of the things that I've seen work really well is hiring those tribal digital navigators who are actually from those communities, funding those tribal digital navigator programs in those communities. So
yeah. Okay, so we have 5 minutes before we move to some really great questions from the audience. So I'm going to ask one last question for each of you. This probably is a good summary question, and I think it's probably the reason for this session, which is we're about to see 5 years of federal funding coming to states and communities to support digital equity work. What advice do you have for people here in the audience who want to use those funds to make meaningful advancements in terms of equity and justice? H, you're unmuted. You want to go first?
sure. It's a really hard question. I think in the tribal context, really making sure that you're educated on tribal sovereignty, really making sure that when you're building up tribal digital navigator programs, you are like working closely with people who are already in the community. You know, recognizing like the very like culturally relevant context. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, you know, these digitization of language learning programs, like that is huge. You know, the digitization of historical records, like there is so much going on. And every tribe is different. And I think that is like key to thinking about tribal digital equity, is recognizing that it's going to look different in every community.
Jordana, so with all of your experience and your work on the ground, what's your like one sentence take on what people should think about?
I would say you know, the big thing when in serving low-income communities, sometimes people will just say, oh, it's just an adoption problem, right? Especially when you have a federal map that's supposed to reflect the truth, right? Or the experience on the ground. So people, I hear people telling, you know, talking about this region, oh, it's just an adoption. No, actually, they want to solve this, and they have been working before this even came about to try to do that. And so they're not ignorant. They're interested, as everybody else is. They know the purpose. They know. I was hearing about the homework gap before it was called the homework gap in my research in the lowest income communities on the border. And then I think you know, another thing is we're including broadband 101 and broadband policy and law in all of our digital workforce development programs. We're going to have professional development in addition to, you know, the specific work in IT and building broadband networks and all, you know, with the community colleges and colleges and so forth. We're going to build in policy and law and broadband 101. How did we get here, right? Because these young people are going to make the new laws to have us you know, put humans before artificial intelligence, and to create that. They're going to, if we're successful in this, they're going to be at the table. A diverse population of our country will be at the table implementing smart cities, artificial intelligence, you know, creating the algorithms, and they'll be able to bring a diverse experience and know when it's harmful and perpetuating past discrimination, or when it's something that is helpful and useful. So we need them at the table all the way around. So you know, just focus on that. And number one, don't be distracted. There's so much, you know, going on, and we're working on the ground with communities at the same time that we're fighting major policy and rule problems for equity. that just don't make sense. They're not even using all that we know in this country, and how to do this. It's totally ignoring the amazing data sets we have and local community surveys, and then with the LOC, totally ignoring community development in this country and how we do finance for good. So don't get distracted. Keep your eye on the prize. I learn every day from the people on the border, keeping their eye on the prize and building. I mean, they were the fastest to build that fiber to the home network and forming those coalitions. And they're FAR Texas and Brownsville are going to help the other part of the region, and we're working regionally for it.
I love that.
How's that for one sentence?
It was great. I wanted embroidered on a pillow. It was honestly wonderful advice. Juan, what about you? What are you thinking? What's the advice you'd send people home with today?
Know that you're not alone. There are best practices that have been developed. There's been curriculum that's developed. There are folks that are on the ground of the work. There's folks that are advocating. Everybody, like, no one is off the table. Anybody who's invested in this work, you're invited to sit with me. Now, if you're not, then you're invited to fight with me, and you don't want to do that. But I want to say, don't be scared to jump in, no matter what age, which age level, where you're starting. But also remember, there's a bunch of us who are doing this work. Pick up the phone, send a text, send the email. We're here, and let us help you get to where you need to be to continue this work. I'm going to be tired and probably not retired, but I'm already tired. Some of us are going to be tired. We're going to need folks to carry on this fight, right? Because it's not over. And those are the folks that I want to inspire. So call me, call my peers here. Let us catch you up.
That's awesome. Thank you. Okay, so there's some really great questions. One of them, H actually took a stab at answering in the chat, but I kind of want to talk about it because it's an issue I really care about too. So the question is this: in the conversations you've seen across tribal communities, but I think this applies to other communities as well, and I'm sure it's unique to tribal communities, so I'd like to learn more about that. What, if any, is the conversation regarding the urban Native community? And I would say the urban community in general as well. In my area, we see a lot of community members who leave their reservation to relocate to the urban areas, but the problems of digital equity still exist for those individuals, and sometimes it feels as though community members are a little isolated from accessing the established resources in the city. So I think that oftentimes, like, urban and rural are pitted against each other in this work. And what do you all think about that? Are you seeing that? And how do we remedy that?
Yeah, a lot of the same problems that you see with internet access on reservations are mirrored in the urban Native community, because, like Juan was describing, that history of redlining, you'll see that where urban Native population centers are, they're in historically redlined communities. So there's less broadband access, less broadband deployment. They're cut off from a lot of those social services that could help get people connected. And one of the cool things about the Twin Cities is looking at how the tribes still work with their tribal members even after they leave the reservation or in the cities. Like Red Lake Nation, for instance, has like a community college here in the Twin Cities, and almost all of the tribes in Minnesota have some sort of tribal office in the Twin Cities as well, because, we have a huge urban Native population. Like, I think it's more than 70% of Native people in the US live in urban areas. So we're seeing some of those same problems, and it's some of those same solutions, right? Of hiring people in the community, like people who have that trusted relationship to help, build those digital skills.
I think, Lauren, that it's the approach we're taking in the persistent poverty regions, just because of all the uncertainty around the maps, even though they're called out, and certainly a covered population and the persistent poverty regions are called out. We are diversifying. We know that this process that we're going through, we want to make this, the IIJA, help make it an equitable process and support Angela in all that she has on her plate. And we want to help with that, with the knowledge that we can bring from our communities. But we also know that all this work that we're doing, it's going to help us with every single kind of grant, from federal to other philanthropic. We're Connect Humanity has been working with other organizations to work with philanthropy, who is stepping up in amazing ways. And in community development finance, philanthropy have always done program related investments or grants, right? Or you build in this other, a grant from the SBA or the Department of Commerce and or the Department of Labor, right? So we need to do that, and do that well, diversify, use all the knowledge that we're creating. And the new, one of the things I did right before I started with Connect Humanity was create for a major philanthropy in South Texas, a whole digital equity, program in the giving area and in the grant area. And so that program is already funding digital navigator programs, and they funded some infrastructure build out and helped the capital stack, and just is doing marvelously. And so we're working broadly across the country, helping philanthropy to have the access to the information it needs to make decisions about their own programs and their own areas of giving. We have major organizations stepping up to do that.
Thank you. There's one question here. I'm going to ask this, and I have a kind of a follow-up question. Is there resistance, though, to digital adoption because of the fear that government will use the technology to spy on them, or that all their data and money will be stolen? And I think my follow-up question is, are you finding, are you seeing tension in your work around digital justice, kind of thinking about the harms of the internet, that and what that means, and how you connect, how you do this work, and also think about the implications of the internet?
I don't have like the most educated response to this, but we've been there. Folks have been getting robbed online since the beginning of the internet, or when we first got the computers. Folks have been getting their identity stolen, even in your mail. Anybody can go and open up your inbox and take all your stuff. So I think that, yes, like there are fears that were created around this, but I don't think that these are things that are new. Again, I'll bring it back to like all of a sudden, oh my God, all this identity, that whatever. But stuff like this has been happening for so long already, right? And so what we're trying to do in community is we're trying to minimize that fear. No, like, why are you struggling with going to cash your check at a checkout place because you don't want to open up an account, because you don't want to do online banking, and X, Y, and Z, right? And so we limit communities that were already impacted by the digital divide and digital inequality simply by creating these narratives that are already happening, internet or not.
I think all of our digital workforce programs, a lot of my colleagues, and certainly on the Texas-Mexico border, are building in major modules on internet safety and security, and for the digital navigators to train the community and go out to have the impact. We're trying to catch up. We failed with the internet, with protecting people from what was happening. We're experiencing that now with mental health challenges and very significant events in our country that threaten our democracy. Even so, we failed. With AI, it's going to be 100,000 times more difficult. So that's why we need these digital navigator programs, and to really have people understand the architecture of the internet, how it works. What do we want? What do we want to create? And have people and young people, all ages, right? But train, I want to change the whole curriculum of schools. So we're going to do digital navigators, and the whole curriculum of schools needs to give people the information they need to function well and to have an agency and impact on laws and policies to protect people as well. So we're catching up, and we're going to try to do it in a big way. So I think none of us are giving up, even though it feels daunting, because there's so many pitfalls to safety and security on the internet and beyond with AI as we go forward. So, but that's what this is all about, really. This is all about having a diverse population involved in laws and policies and training in schools, and to reach everybody, because we can't be anymore throwing harmful things out at people and not telling them, yeah, when it's free, guess what? You're the product. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how it works. None of this should be hidden. A corporation shouldn't tell a community, oh, only we understand this. You'll never understand this. The lowest income communities, the mothers in the colonias understand drainage because they experienced the flooding more than the engineers that came to solve something. They should have, in some cases, they should have talked to them before, because they know exactly how the water flows. And likewise, they are learning broadband networks, just like I had to in community development. It wasn't part of my training, but I knew it had to be part of the Community Reinvestment Act, which is our, one of the most important pieces of civil rights legislation that I want people to grasp onto again and hold accountable for this area of work, as we did back in 2016 to make broadband and digital equity part of the Community Reinvestment Act, and now with the current update to CRA.
That's one. So H, Juan, Jordana, thank you so much for your time and your expertise and these just really wonderful, thoughtful responses. I'm going to turn it over to Kendra for wrapping up the event. There are a couple still fascinating questions in the chat that maybe we can handle by text, but thank you all. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much to our speakers and moderators for such an insightful and very candid discussion. I really enjoyed it. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We'll hope you come back for tomorrow, session 3. Again, this recording will be emailed to you and also available on the Metro site, metro.org/build-to-last. We'll hope you'll come back tomorrow as we bring together panelists to discuss how they're adapting new and innovative tools and strategies to help shape and inspire the future of digital equity work beyond this current investment of federal funding. So we're excited to have a powerful keynote address from Pamela Price, Deputy Director for the Balm and the Gilead, and a Black Futures for Digital Equity Fellow in replacement of Dr. Fallon Wilson, who unfortunately will not be able to join us. And of course, we have our wonderful panelist discussion of emerging digital equity champions, Lydia Flores, Rita Taylor, Matthew Rantanen, and Brittany Wood-Orenson. And this all will be moderated by Kate Rivera. So we look forward to seeing everyone. Last panel tomorrow. Bring the energy, bring the excitement. We can't wait to see you.